crowd where all of them were nice people but still very somber and being like, we have problems that you're going to fix. Bad news. A lot of our answers are like, maybe your group, not so much.
Real quick, since we are all losing our voices because Gen Con, if you could move forward, really, we actually would appreciate that because we're going to be throwing back tomorrow.
And we're going to whisper.
All right.
A friend of mine does that for first grade class. She has the most video students ever. Sitting there all the time.
Well, it's nice.
They should rent some PA. They got the speakers, but they should rent some.
Yeah, right. They're just for decoration. They're cardboard boxes.
So,
wow, we like know most of the people.
ready to kick it off?
Yeah, I think so.
So, thank you guys for coming to the Diversity in Gaming panel. And we have one more member of the Paizo staff. Jessica will be joining us, hopefully in progress. One thing I want to get out there right at the start is that this panel is called Diversity in Gaming, and you may look up here and be like, wow, that is a lot of nondescript white folks.
Even the same color hair.
Yeah. People get us mistaken all the time.
Yeah.
We recognize that, and this is not a discussion where we tell you how to do diversity in gaming because clearly we all have it figured out. This is a discussion as much for us as for this is a back and forth to figure out how can we as a community make our industry and our hobby better, more inclusive, and we're specifically the reason we're on this panel is because we feel like we can speak to some things like gender and LGBT issues and whatnot, but that is only a small part of the overall diversity thing, and we do not presume to speak for the experience of gamers of color or other various groups that differ from the so-called mainstream.
Also, we're here because, we care what you have to say, and we want your input for, to work on our corner of this.
Yeah, this is a discussion.
Well, one thing that we tell folks a lot, especially when folks come to us and it's like, oh, we really like that you did this. Oh, we really hate that you did this. Something that we feel pretty strongly about is that this is a discussion, a dialogue, a topic that is not about enlightenment. It's not like, okay, and we got to this, and we have done it, and we covered all of our bases. And now we have been inclusive. And now...
Exactly. Never complain there.
Exactly. I mean, this is not a thing about, like I said, this is not about reaching the ideal inclusivity nirvana. This is just something that we feel strongly about and we want to keep working on. We think that we've had a lot of successes in this. We know that we've screwed it up plenty of times. And we hear about that. And that's the sort of thing where I think one of the biggest challenges, and something we'll probably hit on a little later, is when people bring us criticism, a lot of, especially creatives, a lot of artistes, their immediate reaction is like, no, but I tried! Why are you telling me I didn't do a good job? It's getting over that initial reaction. It's like, we tried, and we apparently messed up, so let's hear what we can do better next time. And that's really a big thing that we want to talk about here. Additionally, I know a number of you are authors, writers, have your own creative ventures and whatnot, and feel strongly about this topic. And if we can share any of our experiences, our successes, but really, honestly, our failures, and what we've done to address
learn from our examples.
Yeah, we'd love to share those with you all. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So
let's introduce ourselves.
You all know us, right? Go ahead.
Okay, I'm James Elstetter. I'm the managing editor of Paizo Publishing.
So I'm Judy Bauer. I'm one of the associate editors for Paizo.
And I'm Wesley Schneider. I'm editor-in-chief at Paizo. And the invisible person who may or may not be joining us is Jessica Price, who is our project manager.
Who's almost as loud now as she will be when she gets here.
Yeah.
Just trying her first voice.
So, unless there's anything that you guys want to touch on right up front, I'd kind of like to open this up to questions.
I think it should all be Q&A. This is about us having a conversation. Do you have any questions? Yes.
How are you working diversity into your products?
It's diversity. Maybe we should do something with that.
Okay, so I think probably one of the best places to start is with our iconic characters. If you are all not already familiar with the Pathfinder role-playing game, one of the things that we did when we started out was we wanted to introduce a number of characters that are from our world that could really stand in for you guys, for the players, for the people who are in the game, but still have that represented like in our art and whatnot. So we created a pretty much an adventuring party that's grown to be somewhat too large to be just an adventuring party. a whole mercenary company.
So these several rival groups.
So several characters who are our stand-in for largely the players, and we use them in our art. And you guys have probably seen if you go into the Sagamore Ballroom, you'll see dozens of huge posters of all of them, and you'll see them on all of our covers and in our art. So like Valoros the Fighter, and Sione the Sorcerer, and Sela the Paladin, and so on and so forth. Every class has an iconic character who is kind of like the poster child for that class, but also for the players. So when we were going through that, something that we were making very conscious decisions about what sorts of characters to have in these. But beyond that, it's like, okay, we need a fighter. So we need a male, but we'll have a male fighter. And we'll have a female sorceress. And those were our first two. And beyond that, it's like, well, we don't want to, this can't be a game for just white guys and white girls. It's like this, we need to have a good representation throughout all of this, of races and of gender. So immediately the next one that we came up with was Kira, our cleric, who's of a more Middle Eastern descent. And just
clothing style.
And her clothing style is very much indicative of those cultures. And it continues on down the road. I mean, you guys have, I'm not going to go through the entire checklist of like, look, we've got this one, and this one, and this race, and this gender, and so on and so
forth. Sela was actually a very important one because we thought it was very important. Like we do, some people say, oh, it doesn't feel very artificial to sit down there and spreadsheet out, like, what character classes do we need to fill, how many male, how many female, like count those things. But it's actually really important because it makes sure that you're not, some of this is, Judy taught me, just like keeping track of how many male versus female characters you have or whatever, keeps your unconscious biases from, hitting you in the face later down the road. You can see them early and you can work to fix them. And so one of the things that we were sort of on a tangent, one of the things we were really excited about when we came out with the Iconics was to make our iconic paladin, the goodest of the good guys, to be this badass black woman. And like that was really
Sela,
she turned out great. Yeah.
I would say Sela is far and away one of our most popular iconic characters.
Yeah.
She's on the cover of like a dozen of our products and whatnot, and she looks awesome, and we've had more reaction to her just being like, oh, I've not seen a character like this in like my entire role-playing career. She's awesome. Where can I learn more about her?
Yeah.
That's also been an interesting thing. We had vague ideas of like, okay, and if these characters are popular, maybe someday someone will ask a question about them and want to know more. So that happened real fast. So almost immediately, we started doing backgrounds for all of these characters. And what expanded out from that was these characters became so popular that everybody wanted to know everything about them. We started doing stories about these meet the iconic background stories for the various iconics. And what we found, which was really surprising, was a lot of folks started asking, like, so what's their sexuality? Like, what kind of guys or girls or whatever does
what are they into? Yeah.
Yeah. What's Celestial into? It's like That's another.
There's not a lot of question of what Celestial is into.
The internet has many theories.
Yeah. Iconic/fiction was we were fascinated the first time we saw the fan service, slash art of some of our icons.
There's so much Pathfinder porn.
I think we all independently, like over the course of a few weeks, somebody would be like, "Did you see?"
I guess I'm in my office.
That's how you know you've succeeded, is that somebody is making dirty pictures of your character.
What was really fascinating was, as folks were wanting to know more about all these characters, they got really interested in their sexuality. And that's not something that you can generally just depict in a piece of art.
It doesn't come up in the dungeon a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an Odia. Do I hate it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's something that we've increasingly put a lot of thought and effort into. Something that was kind of a relatively big thing for us was we were working on the Pathfinder comic book last year with Jim Zlubkovich, who's down there signing things, and it's awesome, and you should all check it out, etc. But at one point, it's always been kind of in our headcanon that Mauricio and Kira are kind of a thing. And like Mauricio, she's an elf, so whatever. And Kira is a much more, kind of a much more reserved lesbian. And when we had the two of them being in the same adventuring party, we're going back and forth with Jim, the writer, and at one point it was finally like, oh yeah, and by the way, they could have a thing. And well, did we pitch that to him or did
we told him all their backgrounds, but he was the one who was like, well, can we have them get together? And it was like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense, right? Like, and there's four of them in the party. And then that happened. That came out, and that was the first time we, I guess, publicly revealed. Was it for either of them? We may have revealed.
It was for either of them because we don't really believe in going on the message boards and being like, oh, and let us tell you all about Valeros's kinks.
Yeah. But so when they did get
That's another
comics, people were very surprised and excited because we had said for years. I mean, admittedly, it was pretty fun because we had mentioned sometime early on that people were like, well, do you have gay comics? And we're like, well, yeah, we have gay comics and bi comics. And they were like, well, who is it? And before we could even answer, people started being like, I hope it's this one. I hope it's this one. And we were like, so this is really fun. Tell us. And that was really fun. So then, a year or two later to finally reveal it publicly, it was a thing that had been there since the beginning, but it hadn't really come out. And it was really fun to see the fan reaction.
Now, here's also something that we feel pretty strongly about. That came out in the 4th volume, the 3rd volume of the Pathfinder comic. That comic was not called, Girls Kissing, Pathfinder Comics, Girls Kissing. That was not the title. I mean, this happened on, page 24, and they just kind of beat up. It's like, yeah, oh, okay. I mean, it feels very natural. It's not something we were particularly interested in being like, this is the gay one. Because that's not who they are, right? And I mean, it's a natural thing for our world. We've tried to make the Pathfinder campaign setting feel like a place where the prejudices and some of the nastiness that happens in the real world just doesn't need to exist. I mean, we've really been doing this since issue 1. I mean, if you guys check out Pathfinder #1, the first thing that we printed that says Pathfinder on it, there's a description of the town of Sandpoint in there. And there's a gay couple in there. And one guy owns the theater, because duh. And the other guy... The other guy is one of the paladins in town. And it's just, I think you read about the theater owner at first, and you get, that doesn't come up, but then 4 pages later, it's like, Paladin so-and-so is also in a relationship with Cyril, who runs the theater up there. That's it. It's like a sentence about it there. And it's played very nonchalantly, but it's played very nonchalantly on purpose, because it's not a big deal. It's not something anyone in town cares about. And that's just the way of things.
And that's not just because we are on, people on the message boards will sometimes, or Twitter, where people will be like, you're the gay agenda, your progressive liberal crusade, and I think our answer has generally been like, oh my, yes. politics aside, which we care very much about, a lot of it is just about what makes sense in the world. So like, let me get this straight. When people are like, oh, people would have an issue with that. It's like, so my neighbor is, neighbor A is married to an elf that lives for 1,000 years, and neighbor B is married to maybe someone that isn't even human, or humanoid, and then neighbor C is married to another, human of the same gender. Really? That's your big deal? You married a boy, but like the neighbor with the orc is just fine? Like, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It's warm-blooded, so you're still probably.
Yeah, exactly. It's not in lizard folk. How does that even work? So I don't think it just doesn't make sense. But we do. Lizard folk. How does it work?
I mean, I hear it.
Yeah. But also, I totally lost it. I got to get rid of that. Yeah, exactly.
So, that's kind of tirade.
I remember it. That's lizard folk. Lizard folk again. That's the thing. People often say, but isn't it important to have, prejudice and conflict and whatnot within the fantasy world so that it can be overcome? Isn't that more powerful than just a magical utopia where everything is, where there is no prejudice? And we definitely agree with that. And in fact, there are certainly plenty of places in Galarian where you can find whatever prejudice you need to find for the, for the advancement of your storyline, so that your heroes can triumph over it, or so that it can be part of your character's formative background. The difference is that we don't feel like it's important that the prejudice must always be there. If you don't want it in your game, it doesn't need to be in your game. Like, it doesn't have to be there. And that's what we feel is the big switch, unfortunately, sometimes from the real world, the difference of being able to just play whatever sort of game you want.
Because sometimes when if that is your everyday life, turns out not so much fun to always have it, be the center of everything in the game, so.
And since the initial question was like, what have we done? Probably one of the most public things that has just happened in the last couple of weeks here is we've been doing Meet the Iconic stories for all of the new iconics that we've been presenting from our advanced class guide. So I see a lot of you with like today's pin out there of Zadim and whatnot, the Slayer. So he's one of the new guys, but we just, not last week, but the week before that, got to our iconic shaman. And a longtime friend and freelancer of ours, Crystal Frazier, wrote the backstory for her, and through a number of conversations with us and others, chose to make her transgender. And the entire story explains Chartra's backstory and her life and the experience that led her toward making that change, and the entire kind of tradition in dwarven society where that is that can be a part of like their shamanistic rituals and whatnot, and how she's very much accepted by her family and friends and community, but still ends up having to leave that and go on and being an adventurer. The big thrust of the backstory, though, is about her being an awesome shaman and adventurer. It is not, again, this is not one where it's like, this is the transgender character. That is something that she is, but that is not the defining thing of her life. This is not the thing that makes her the awesome adventurer. This is a thing that she is and is part of her life, and colors her as a character, but what makes her awesome and what makes her like an amazing adventurer and hero and whatnot is all the cool adventures she goes out and has.
She's a spellcaster with a talking lizard. Like, that seems a
having
little
a talking
more...
lizard is what makes her But the fan reaction to that has been fantastic. fantastic. I mean, honestly, there were a number of us who were kind of girding ourselves to be like, okay, we'll really watch the message boards because if things get nasty, then delete. Exactly.
But I don't think I've liked that many response posts in a thread in so long. I'm just like, oh, you're all awesome. Oh man.
It's become a really good community on a variety of issues, but it's really, I sort of forget sometimes what other message boards on the internet can be like, because our community is very good at not just self-policing, but supporting. And that's done almost, we're there, we try and help out, but that's really the function of the community members.
Somebody had even asked, actually, not a very different question from this question, which was just like, well, what have you guys done? And I always find myself being like, well, there's those two characters in the first Pathfinder, and then we had that couple over there, and then there, and then there. So finally, I just sat down and pretty much as a challenge to me and a lot of the other editors and developers were like, can we come up with a list of just 50 GL?
The top 50. Yeah.
Well, not even the top, just 50. And yeah, we did that in a half an hour. It's like, oh, well, that's a couple, and they're a couple, and they're a couple, and they're a couple. So it's just I ended up with probably just in what we could come up with in
an hour
or so, more than 60 LGBTQ characters.
All of the things.
And just put the list together, and I put it up on my Tumblr page, and it just turns out it turns out we've got 50 characters right now, and I could keep going on from there. And it's, again, not something we've made a huge deal about, but if you're going through Pathfinder products, and if you're looking for characters who are like you, or your friends, or your family, and want to see that sort of inclusion, yeah, we've got it all over the place.
And again, this is, we're primarily speaking about the diversity of sexuality and whatnot, because that's a thing that that we three are particularly interested in. But also maybe even just something as, supposedly simple as gender representation in our game.
Well,
not just
you want to tell them about how you train our developers?
Exactly.
So when I started, I was always told that, we want to have balanced representation, we want to have, totally respectful and varied representation of women. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. I'm super excited about this. And I've been through some adventures, and it's not that many women, actually. But let me gut check and go through things, make a list of all the NPCs. So that was about 1 in 5. Okay, just check the next one, because some of these things are, they're coming off the press very fast. And okay, about 2 in 5, one going, and I kept track against a bunch of times, and then found this. So guys, by the way, I think when you're seeing, maybe there's some very important female characters, and that feels like there's a lot of women, but here's the list, here's the numbers, I done the math. Who do you want to change? Also, I flagged a bunch of people who seem possible, like they'd be easy to change. And I got a little bit of pushback at first because, these are things we're trying to often get to the printer within a week, and it's risky to be changing pronouns, and sometimes there's art and you're stuck, and but West, especially since I had the data, West was very supportive, and the developers, I think, were very quick to figure out that, oh right, this is just how it's supposed to work. And actually, wouldn't this be a lot easier if we took care of it ahead of time? And they went back and started talking a lot more to the authors. So we started percolating it back through the chain. And the authors very quickly were like, oh right, that's a thing. We're supposed to be doing that. And we can do it pretty easily.
And to be fair, I was maybe even the first person you did that to. And I certainly had the standard reaction, but it's already written. And I think there was one where the first one, I think you caught it as it was basically going out the door. And it was we don't have time, let's just ship it. And I, like, in later years, deeply, I mean, that was a long time ago, and I deeply regretted that because there was just not good representation of that book. And I still feel like a little disappointed in, well, not a little, I'm still disappointed that I made that decision, and it's certainly not one I have repeated, which actually is I think a big theme of this thing is like doing things, learning why that thing was maybe not so great, and then getting better.
It's awesome though, because like there was a period there where we were still trying to get this right, where Judy would walk into the developer pit, which is right next door to where the editors are, with a manuscript that has male tally, but female tally. And it's like, you have 3 women in this, one of them's dead, and one of this is a prostitute. This needs to change. And the guys are typically like,
You're totally right.
It's not. Record was one that came in with 3 women who were versus like 50 who were all dead and all, or actually they were all dead prostitutes.
That's it.
I thought this was a good idea. So.
And I think it should be recognized that people don't change overnight. I think there's sometimes it's very easy to get into an us and them mindset when you're dealing with issues like this. But I feel like it's very important to recognize that the people who initially went are now like proactively doing this and are proud of the fact that they're doing it and are advocating for that with their office. Like it was not a ship that turned immediately because I mean let's face it, our hobby comes out of a tradition that is not exactly diverse or accepting. Like there was definitely a niche that people perceived gaming as having, and it played exclusively to that for a long time. And changing that, whether at one company or at an industry level, is a long process, but it can work, right? And I think I really appreciate. I actually deeply appreciate and thankful for all of my friends who are wiser than me when it comes to issues like this, who are very patient and tolerant and willing to see that, like, okay, yeah, I am. And I don't know if we'll be on a podcast, but I am fucking it up. And then who are willing to tell me where I'm doing that, and then like give me the good faith of the chance to change, because that's something that's really important.
And I don't want to give you guys the perception that our developers or any creatives out there that were writing for us or anyone are, like total misogynists from this. It's just that they weren't considering it. As they're going through and they're doing their writing, it's like, all right, well, I've got an orc warlord, so that's this like big brawny dude with this and that. And then I've got like this other like stock character, so I've got the knight in shining armor, so okay, we've got this guy in shining armor over here. And then I've got the king, so I've got the king. It's just so many of those kind of stock characters that are just kind of in the back of your head as kind of...
that you've seen a million times.
Yeah, so it's just not even thinking about it. It's like, and that's a male character, and that's a male character, and that's a male character. And just not thinking about it at all. But then when you go back and look, it's like, oh. But honestly, when you do go back and look, you start making changes and making decisions that actually make these characters far more interesting.
Yeah. Queen Iliosa would be way more interesting than King Iliosa.
Yeah.
And from Curse of the Crimson Throne, Commissioner Path, we did run back. But yeah, I think not thinking about it is more often than not, at least in the circles that I'm in, it seems to be the primary source of a lot of the problems. It's usually not, well, mainly because I hang out with really awesome people, but like, usually it's not an intentional thing. Even though people may get defensive about it, they're defensive oftentimes because of guilt. Like, I mean, it's certainly like, I mean, getting called on stuff is really awkward and uncomfortable. Like, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't call them on it. It doesn't mean that they don't have to own up. But like, that's going to cause that reaction sometimes.
So there's one question that actually I want to throw out there. So we work with a lot of authors and artists. A lot of folks in this room are authors and artists. And they're folks who are trying to write the other, whoever that might be, whatever that be. What can the artists in the crowd, the authors in the crowd do if, like, so take me, for example, white guy, I want to write a character who comes from, like, a more South American sort of descent and whatnot, and I know very little bit about that. That's not my experience. I want to do that, and I want to do it right without being, grossly insulting. How could you possibly ever do that?
Yeah, no, this is not a question for us.
Actually, this is something that we've had to deal with a few times. So if an author brings you something like that, I need you. I also want to get out of it.
I was thinking this would actually be a brief tangent. The Klingon story, I think, is appropriate here. Like in Pathfinder #1, we ordered art of an Asian guy. It was like Kaijitsu.
The first Pathfinder was supposed to have a picture of Longiku Kaijitsu, Amiko's father, in it, who's a pretty major character.
Yeah,
and likes it.
And so we order an Asian. And he gets sent off to this artist, and he comes back, and he's a Klingon. Like, with brow ridges and everything. And we're looking
You guys do not even understand. I mean, not even human.
And we're looking at this and we're like, this artist, well, where's this artist from? I mean, he's from, like, Italy or something. Has he never seen it? Like, we have Google. Like, this is not and that sort of thing happens more often than you want to admit. And fortunately, it's usually not as... And so we killed that art, obviously.
We did like 3 revisions on this piece, and each time, worse.
Yeah.
Like, worse.
So finally, we killed it at the last minute before it went to press. And it was like, that art's related. But actually, it had kind of a stinger because, like, the next year or later, so we kill the art. It never appears in print. We're like, wow, that piece behind us. And then one day I'm on the message boards, I see it pop up as somebody's avatar. I'm like, what is it? The Klingon's back! It had been left, even though it had been killed from the product, it had been left on the server. So when the web team decided to go find pictures to make avatars out of, they were looking for every image they could find, and that one was still in there. So I think we eventually got that image deleted, but for a while there was like...
no, it's still on there. So if you want to wade through like 14,000 Pathfinder little images,
we actually, we really should have had an art director on this panel as well, because I think that they often have an even harder time than the writers or than the editors, because a lot of artists are really hard-coded, fantasy artists especially, are really hard-coded into the white chainmail bikini sort of style of the 70s and whatnot. And it can be really hard to ask for something different. For instance, like, the classic...
We had an art order for an Earth Mother character, where I think we said the class, but we didn't really give any other details in it. Well, that's a guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Mother was in the name.
And so, it just turns out, if you're not super specific, no matter what you ask for or what you say, you will get a white guy.
And even if you are super specific, and sometimes admittedly, there are language barriers because we use a lot of international artists. So
Never
sometimes,
ask for olive skin.
Yeah, olive skin. You get.
Oh my god.
Yeah. But there's a lot of stuff that's just hard coded in. For instance, like trying to order there was a while back we were ordering a larger female character, and she came in and was of course supermodel skinny and whatnot. And we went no. Like she's a larger woman, she's a woman of size, and I was just like, oh, okay. Boobs increase. No. It's like give this woman 50 pounds. Okay. Damn it.
Getting pants on women or any clothes.
Add pants is the art that we most frequently see. And the one that is hardest to get through. And so you may wonder sometimes, this does not always, unfortunately, due to the deadlines we work under, sometimes you don't have time to go. If you are expecting the art in, 2 weeks before this book ships and it comes in wrong, maybe you get one chance of revision and then it's gone. So sometimes, we've definitely published art that we're not, that's in that chainmail bikini sort of style that we're not proud of. But it was one of those things where it was like, well, is that or have a blank page there? And sometimes, in a bestiary, that blank page really sticks out when there's art on every other page. So we kill stuff when we can, or change it when we can, but sometimes you got to go to print, and that's an unfortunate reality. But we skipped the original question, right? Rather, I shunted it off on the other side. In terms of writing the other, I'm very much still wrestling with that, but I am encouraging my authors to do it. Step one, if you can have authors that actually know what they're talking about, that works too. But I really think I'm of the opinion, and some people are of a different opinion, and that's fine. Some people think really you should write what you know. But as much as I would hate for a white male writer to write a minority and get it wrong, I think that using fear of getting it wrong as an excuse to never try is actually worse in the long term. And I could be wrong. There are really good arguments on the other side, but I'm sort of generally of the try and fail versus, try to do a good thing and fail versus stay with what's safe.
Or you can just try and then do better next time.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know what? The person who tells you that you got it wrong might also be able to tell you how to get it right.
And so one of the tricks first I just want to point out a book in a workshop series that you can learn more about online called Writing the Other. It's a fantastic book that Logan has shown me, and I just looked into that. And it is all about you have your experience, how to put your experience aside or take certain things from your experiences and do your damnedest to try and write from different perspectives and whatnot. And that's called Writing the Other. Great book, and it is perfectly aimed at this topic. One of the other things that you can do, and I'm going to put the caveat on this, that I'm of two minds about this. There's definitely many perspectives on this, but the two that I'm going to touch on here is that if you, for example, say I decide that I want to have a lesbian character in one of my books. I know nothing about growing up as a woman or being a lesbian or whatever have you. So how do I make that feel authentic? One option that I have is writing it. Well, first option I have is actually talking to people who have that experience. I know the world is small and there's not an internet or anything, but it turns out that there are people out there who are having these discussions, or sometimes are available and willing to have these discussions. What I do not suggest you go do is find your one lesbian friend, and in my case, what I would not do and not suggest to anyone else do is go find my one lesbian friend and be like, oh, you're a lesbian, so obviously you can help me write my book. That's not really something she signed up for when she became a Cargarian lesbian.
Turns out we're not a monolith, so people have different experiences.
Yeah, and that's the other one thing. You can't go to one person and be like, obviously, your experience is representational of every experience. What I would be getting from that one person is that one person's experience. And that can't be true. Like Judy said, that is not a monolith. It's that's not the experience. So everybody's going to have a wide spectrum of different experiences. If you're really going down that route, going online and there are forums or discussions like this sort of about pretty much any topic you can think of. Going online, asking questions about this, getting feedback from people who consider themselves experts on the topic or are willing to talk about it, who have been through these experiences, that's a great place to start.
And maybe just do consider doing a little lurking first, and just, see if you can pick up some basics before you start asking questions that are, maybe if you had done 30 seconds of reading, it wouldn't have been quite so awkward.
Don't just storm in and demand, like, I'm a white guy here, I don't have time to read, but please answer my question specifically because I want to get back to writing my novel.
Yeah.
Like,
by the way, I'm an ally.
Yeah.
Because it turns out not anybody else's job.
Yeah.
We should probably take we should take some responses to that question.
Absolutely. And like, also what you guys think.
Yeah.
You had a.
Yeah, well, I've been to a lot of these panels and had a lot of these conversations with different groups, and that question comes up a lot, and it's always sort of, to me, it's kind of surprising to hear, because I'm like, George R. R. Martin's not a gourmet medieval chef, but he doesn't have trouble, finding out how to describe a medieval meal in exceptional amounts of detail. And it's the same as, if I'm writing a story about vampires, I don't know what it's like to be a vampire. Now, true, I'm not risking offending the vampire community by the representative. Well, maybe. There are people who identify with them. I'm not really worried about it. I'm worried about it anyway. But the other thing is, even if all you have, if you live out in the middle of Montana and you have your one lesbian friend and no internet, just talk to at least one person so that, to get the basics, just to make sure, check with at least one other person to look at what you've written and say, oh, no, we don't do that. That's not Mendefented Scissoring. You're making that up. Or, just anything that's obvious that's really going to take somebody out of the story. I had something else that's gone. Next.
I think that's really interesting because, one thing that I think that touches on is that, like, in many cases, you can have I think George R. R. Martin, since you brought him up, often gets asked how he writes such convincing women. He's like, well, I write them like people. It's like, don't make it a big damn deal if it doesn't need to be a big damn deal. We definitely have characters in novels and whatnot where you get paid to page like 400 and it's like, oh, did he just hit on a dude? Oh, okay, that's cool.
It's the classic Dumbledore was gay the whole time thing.
Exactly.
Like, it just didn't come... Well, I know, right? But, like... Yeah. I know, but, like, as a general idea, like, if a thing just doesn't come up, like, if your character is female or gay or whatever, or, anything, if their main thrust is that they're obsessed with the Ninja Turtles, you should probably write about the Ninja Turtles and how they're obsessed with that, rather than the fact that, like, no, but he is gay and obsessed with it.
The other side of that is putting your work in front of somebody who does come from that culture, who does have those experiences. They could go through it. They could be like, this is fantastic, and you publish it, and it goes out in the world, and it gets lambasted. And then your reaction is like, no, she said it was okay. Turns out that don't float.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Because that's pretty much the definition of tokenism. Going to one person and be like, you are the monolith, you are the representative of your entire culture. Thumbs up from you? Okay.
Also, you can't just flash the badge. Sometimes you can, but I really hate that you can't. The idea of if somebody's like, dude, you totally screwed this up, and you're like, no, I'm not straight. Oh, well then, I'm after you. That's not... Just because you are a member of some group that is considered a minority does not make you...
Not a jerk.
Yeah, it doesn't make you not a jerk. Yeah, exactly.
Or the spokesman for that community.
Yeah, or for other communities, certainly.
So, what will happen is and this is something that we always comes up for us is we have a lot of steps in place to try and do right by this. It's very important for us to be inclusive in as many ways as we can, and we put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. I mean, heck, we're up here talking about it with all of you fine people, and then we will put out something and like. As soon as it hits 5 minutes in, somebody will be like, this didn't work for me. How could you have done this? You did this, 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 and this, and this. Why did you treat it like this? And our initial, again, because artistes, our initial reaction is always like, but we tried hard. But it's like, no, we're good people. We thought about it, and we still messed it up. And that's largely what it comes down to. Is like getting over that initial knee-jerk reaction of like, but we tried, and we still mucked it up. But then that time, taking that criticism and accepting it, not being defensive, not being confrontational, just kind of stepping back and being like, oh, you're right, I see your point on this. That this is something we can do better on next time. And then next time, doing better.
Yeah.
Best advice I've ever been given about any of this is just listen. And I think it's something that's very hard for us to do. It's certainly hard for me to do. I love hearing myself talk, as you may have noticed. But like, I think that it's very easy to, when you get into a discussion with somebody, to be just like thinking of the next thing that you're going to say, or every criticism you have a defense for. It's like, no, just take it in, listen to it, evaluate it, get past your initial like, and then actually think about what was said, and
do not write anything for an hour after.
Yeah, exactly, because you may find that actually it's spot on. Like, I mean, and it'll be things often that you never expected. Like, I got criticized from a close friend on my first novel who said, I had a problem with that because there weren't a lot of women in your book. I was like, the main character, she was like, there's a problem with gender in your book. I was like, but one of the main characters is female, like, clearly. And she was like, yeah, but the rest of the world, the background, there were no women in the background. Every time you somebody walked on stage and then walked across it, they were men. And it's something that, I naively had never considered, and she was exactly right. And so then, like, when I sat down to write my next one, it was very much like, okay, let's do exactly what we need to do and chart out, like, what are all these supplemental characters? Let's try for gender balance there. Let's try for, things like that. And I mean, it sucks getting called when you're wrong, but that doesn't make you not wrong. I think we've got, like, 5 minutes, so...
I wanted to mention specifically, as you talk about that idea of not being defensive, it's very easy, especially if you are in whatever group you want to call the majority group or the dominant group or whatever. It's very hard to get past the idea that I'm a good person. I'm incapable of having kind of homophobic or racist or misogynistic attitudes. But you really have to get beyond the idea that the only way I can have racist attitudes is if I also own a white hood, and that we're all products of the environments we grew up in, the families we grew up in, and we have these deficits in terms of our knowledge of other perspectives. And so we can set aside that idea that if I write something that ends up coming off sexist, it's not because I'm a bad person. It's because I'm a product of where I came from, and if I want to be sensitive to diversity issues, I need to be open to that feedback and not personalize it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're really ready to excuse ourselves from like, I don't know anything about cars, whatever. Like I'm not going to worry about making a mistake about, if somebody tells me I said something wrong about cars, then I'll be like, okay, I learned a thing. And if you can just generalize that, to the rest of your experience, because there's always going to be some part of other people's experience that's just going to be different. That, you just have to be willing to not always be an expert in other people's lives.
Turns out that's why we read books and role-play games. That difference.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because it's the sort of angle where it's like, it's not anything malicious. It's not because anybody is doing something that you can be like, the way you're thinking is wrong. It's just, this is the way a person thinks. This is the experience they came up with. It's like being told you got something wrong, but you never had any way of knowing that it was wrong. It was just like...
I was going to say, with the exception that, like, that's not, yeah, I mean, don't internalize that. At the same time, that doesn't excuse you from the onus to improve and do due diligence. Like, I don't want people to walk out of here being like, oh, well, Wes said I don't have to take it personally, so that means I never have to improve. I'm exonerated.
The point is to be aware that your experience is not all-inclusive. That even though you have lived your entire life knowing everything that you know, there's still so much more out there. And being conscious of those other experiences and being even aware, like, there are gaps in my experience. There's totally different ways that I could look at this, that I could write this, that I could treat this, that I could be impacted by the world around me. Being aware of those and largely being open to not just learning about them, but kind of one of the hardest tricks is just kind of personally accepting, this is going to sound really kind of naive, but personally accepting that you don't know everything. I mean, you have lived your entire life knowing everything you know, and that's not the case for everyone. You know what you know. You do not know what everybody knows.
And everyone has subconscious biases. They are part of how we evolve, as people. So they're going to be there, and you may feel really like you may not have a problem with them. Some of them you may feel really gross when you realize them about yourself. But like they're part of who you are, and everybody has them. It's like you said, it's not I feel like overt racism and overt sexism is still pretty prevalent. But like there are a lot of things that, depending on where you live, the overt versions have been either totally expunged, well, not expunged, but marginalized. But the subconscious ones are still alive and well. And because people don't think of themselves as racist or sexist most of the time, that's why it's so prevalent, because nobody wants to see that in themselves.
And, even just hearing this, we're also talking about three people that live in like one of the gay-friendliest cities, one of the most liberal cities in the country. Yeah. So a lot of what we're talking about is like, so just do it. There's no problem. It'll be easy, right? Yeah. This can be really hard depending on where you live, and especially if you're like the person that reads all of your stuff.
Well, and like Seattle is an extremely gay-friendly city, so it's very easy to learn how to be sort of inclusive on issues like that. It's also a really white city and a really segregated city. I mean, they're definitely like, I didn't even realize that there are districts in Seattle where you're finally going like, oh, this is where all the not white people live. Like, and you suddenly stand out. I mean, I think that's a thing to remember. Like, you're not going to be equidistant on all points of these axes. We probably have time for one last question. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I've heard you talk an awful lot about men and women, balancing men and women. Have you considered the fact that there's an entire segment of the population that is non-binary?
Okay.
They don't really identify as male or female, or they identify as both, or both and neither kind of thing. Frequently those people, they face this general problem every day of, every time they fill out a form, are you a male or a female? Yeah. You create a character. Is your character male or is your character female? And that would be an area kind of to address.
Absolutely. And actually, you pinpointed one where it's like, I don't think any of the three of us can be like, oh, we had...
Yep. There's a Crystal, someone is a halfling crime lord in a city where I can't remember. Watch for stat blocks.
Yeah.
See if there's gender specified.
Mummy Smash.
Yes.
Well, there's been a little bit of the novels and whatnot, but it's definitely not.
We can do better.
I mean, yeah. Also, I mean, Dirty Secret. One of the reasons we're talking a lot about the like the LGBT stuff, and we're focused on that. So naturally, we tend to do best in those areas because we were focusing on that. There are other areas where we are woefully underrepresentational, and that's the you tell us portion of this thing.
And so that is specifically an area that we are looking at more and more these days.
Yeah.
But it's some, I guess. But yeah,
It needs to work. I think we maybe got one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, just to go back to the question you asked a little bit ago about how do you get people to write things that they haven't experienced. I think speaking more because we all have editorial responsibilities.
Yes.
I think there is a point where if you have an author trying to write something that they haven't experienced, maybe the solution is to find an author that's had that experience. In other words, don't just diversify the characters, diversify the creative team.
And then,
you mentioned, for example, earlier about what if I wanted to character with South American film?
Sure.
Well, you mentioned you work with artists around the world. Do you work with writers around the world?
Absolutely.
Sometimes the best solution is to find someone who's lived the experience of the writers.
And that's one of the, in all honesty, it's like, I hate to sound like I'm collecting, but we just finally had a guy reach out to us who's grew up in Mexico. And it's like, oh my God, finally a Hispanic writer. I'm so excited because it's like he's got this whole like cultural background that like I know nothing about, and I just want to be like, tell me about your folk stories. It's like, yeah, I can read a book of it and whatnot, but how do I know that that's not like, cherry picked and whatnot? It's like, tell me what your actual experience growing up there was. What are the stories? What are the monsters? What are your heroes? Because, anything I'm getting from a secondhand source, having a primary source.
And that's the thing we watch for sometimes on the message boards too, where it's like, it turns out there are a couple people who are like super in-depth experts on like a lot of Hindu mythology, or like, and there's another guy who's writing this like whole kind of campaign setting is all kind of Caribbean and Taino based, like, really specific, based on like his, the legends he grew up in, like growing up in Puerto Rico, and just like people who are like really deep diving into this and then sharing their knowledge is like such a huge valuable resource for us.
But I do think like we are reaching out, we are trying to find a more diverse writer base. But one of the things about the business we're in, and this is not, clearly not always a good thing, is like a lot of these, we publish a lot of books, like, and we have a lot of like monthly lines, and to a certain extent, you go to war with the army you have, and so we're constantly finding new authors, but at the same time, like the core we have right now is fairly white and fairly male, and we're working to fix that.
And by all means, if you have experiences that you would consider distinctive, unique, different from what you would consider like, the typical game designers, we want you. We want you working for us. We want to tell those stories. We don't want to just tell the stories that have been being told for the last 30, 40 years. We don't want to have our bestiaries just be more like, oh, this is from Greek mythology, because those are the only people with mythology, right? It's like we really want it from every, because that makes the game more interesting. It makes the stories better. It just makes everything more interesting.
And on that, we gotta call it.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
This conversation will continue.
Yeah. By all means, if you guys live here, please, if you have any other questions, let's go to the message boards and whatnot. We'll get to them and we'll continue this.